Welcome, everyone. Let's just jump straight into it, because today's explainer completely turns the modern business playbook right on its head. We're looking at a heritage brand, one with incredibly deep roots in authentic, classic motorcycling that is currently pulling off what I think is one of the most fascinating strategic evolutions in the entire industry. I'm talking about Royal Enfield. And the crazy part? They aren't doing it by chasing every new tech trend. They're actually doing something refreshingly old school.
To really understand why we're focusing on them today, you just need to look at this number, 1,070,000. That is the all-time global sales record that Royal Enfield hit for 2025, over 1 million bikes. And this isn't just a slight post-pandemic bump. This represents a massive 25% year-over-year growth. I mean, most businesses in literally any sector would absolutely kill for those kinds of figures. But honestly, the sheer volume of motorcycles they're shipping, that's really only half the story.
So, what does this all mean? The real question we have to ask ourselves is, are we witnessing a true generational come-up from this Indian brand? Because as they enter the 2030s, this company isn't just surviving as some kind of nostalgic novelty act anymore. They are becoming a formidable global powerhouse. We're not just looking at a good sales quarter. We're watching the historic evolution of a legacy manufacturer happening right in front of us.
Here is the roadmap for our strategic case study today. First, the Royal Enfield revival. Second, the danger of hyperscale. Third, the modernization balancing act. Fourth, the sub-brand solution. And finally, a simple business equation.
Chapter 1. The Royal Enfield Revival, from antiquated to modern platforms.
The sheer speed of this evolution is honestly incredible. If you look back to the mid-2010s, Royal Enfield represented good value, sure, but let's be honest, they built bikes that were pretty antiquated. They just weren't up to modern global standards. But then, right in the late 2010s, the INT 650 hits the market. And wow, this was the catalyst. It totally revitalized their manufacturing because it proved they could offer like 90% of a premium parallel twin roadster experience for about 50% of the price of their competitors. And that momentum just rolled right into the launch of their modern liquid-cooled platforms in 2024, which obviously paved the way for that staggering 1 million-plus sales record in 2025.
But you might be wondering, where exactly are all these bikes going?
Well, 90% of their sales are actually domestic, right there in their home market of India. Over there, their 350 line is basically a piece of social infrastructure. It's moving around aunties, cousins, the whole family. But don't ignore that 10% global footprint, because that is becoming increasingly crucial. As wage stagnation and income inequality continue to squeeze buyers here in the Western world, Royal Enfield's hyper-accessible price point is turning into a massive strategic advantage on a global scale.
Moving on to Chapter 2, the danger of hyperscale, the Icarus metaphor in motorcycling.
So the classic capitalist playbook, the stuff they drill into your head at American business schools, says you have to grow at all costs, right? You expand as fast as humanly possible, you court investor capital to supercharge that growth, and you hyperscale just to juice your stock prices and create these wildly huge valuations. Well, Royal Enfield is completely ignoring that. They're running an entirely different playbook. They're actively choosing slow, methodical, thoughtful growth. They lean into nostalgia, keep their prices accessible, and avoid chasing a quick, flashy quarter.
And this kind of restraint really matters. Think of the parable of Icarus flying way too close to the sun. Recent industry history gives us a perfect cautionary tale with KTM. They grew incredibly fast, acting like the easy money and good times would literally never end. But eventually, those wax wings melted, and they found themselves needing a massive bailout and acquisition by Bajaj. By staying methodical, Royal Enfield is deliberately and smartly avoiding that exact trap.
Chapter 3, the modernization balancing act. Air-cooled charm versus liquid-cooled performance.
Now, when your entire brand identity is built on authentic, retro, air-cooled motorcycles, trying to sell a thoroughly modern machine is a really tough needle to thread. Just look at this leap. The old Himalayan 411 was basically an agricultural workhorse. It was slow, but people absolutely loved it for its old-school charm and dirt-cheap price. But the new Himalayan 450, that was a massive leap into the unknown. It actually had an unusually long development cycle, specifically because Royal Enfield knew they had to get their very first liquid-cooled, globally focused bike absolutely perfect right out of the gate.
So did that lead pay off? Absolutely yes, it did. Royal Enfield ended up selling 38,000 units of their liquid-cooled models outside of India in 2025 alone. That is huge. They essentially proved to the world that they could successfully export a thoroughly modern motorcycle that actually appeals to a global audience, which secures some very crucial new revenue streams for them. But it's a tightrope walk. If you make a bike too modern or too futuristic, you run the very real risk of alienating the core audience that loves your old-school vibe. And worse, expensive, tech-heavy bikes require massive R&D budgets, which obviously forces you to raise your retail prices, pricing out the exact budget-conscious buyers that made your company successful in the first place. So what is their solution to this? It's brilliant, really. Parallel plays. They just keep selling those old-school, air-cooled bikes which have wonderfully fat profit margins, and then they take that cash and slowly, methodically reinvest it into the modern, liquid-cooled global platforms. It's an incredibly smart balancing act.
Chapter 4: The Sub-Brand Solution, Cracking the Premium Market.
Okay, let's talk about $10,000. In the motorcycle world, this is a major psychological barrier. It's exactly why competitors like Triumph and Yamaha very deliberately price their mid-weight naked bikes just a hair under this mark. Because the moment a buyer drops 5 figures on a motorcycle, their expectations just absolutely skyrocket. Suddenly, they demand 120-ish horsepower, sure-footed handling, cutting-edge technology, and absolutely bulletproof reliability.
Which brings us to a massive strategic question. Should Royal Enfield try to build a high-performance model to compete at this $10,000 plus price point? Can a brand that is famous for extreme budget accessibility actually convince a buyer to drop over 10 grand on a bike with a Royal Enfield badge on the tank? Honestly, the likely answer is no. But there is a very well-established workaround for this exact problem.
If they truly want to crack that high-end market, they should look at the sub-brand strategy. Toyota figured this out decades ago, right? They knew luxury buyers wouldn't pay top dollar for a car that said Toyota. So they built a better, more luxurious product and spun it off as Lexus. Now, it's totally synonymous with luxury. And we're seeing an Indian company try this right now in motorcycling. TVS recently acquired the storied, albeit dead, British brand Norton to try and enter that high-value luxury space. Royal Enfield could very easily create a premium spin-off brand of their own to bypass those consumer price biases.
And the absolute beauty of this for Royal Enfield is what we call the second mover advantage. They don't have to rush. They can just sit back, relax, and watch the TVS Norton experiment unfold. If TVS succeeds with Norton, Royal Enfield can basically just copy their homework. And if Norton struggles, Royal Enfield gets to see exactly where they went wrong, make a quick adjustment to the formula, and swoop in to unlock the luxury market for themselves.
Finally, Chapter 5: A Simple Business Equation, Rejecting the Jargon.
What do you want to be when you grow up? I know, it sounds a little infantilizing, but it is actually a brilliant framework for understanding a company's long-term vision. Royal Enfield is at a really critical inflection point right now, and they have to answer this. Do they want to build 2 million bikes a year? 10 million? Do they want to become the next Honda? Or do they want to keep a focused, limited global footprint? They have to decide what their ultimate form is. But the key is, they are doing it without losing their minds to corporate greed. Because honestly, guys, business really isn't that complicated. No matter how much MBA grads and consultants love to spin yarns with idiotic corporate jargon. Look at the equation on the screen. You generate revenue, you make sure your costs are lower than that revenue to create profit, you reinvest or distribute that profit, and above all else, your job is to build the absolute best product possible. That is it, the whole shebang. No fancy veneer or granular marketing metrics can ever save a bad product. If you make good stuff at prices regular people can afford, you have a good business. And yet, the rest of the industry is just relentlessly chasing trends. You've got Harley-Davidson spinning their wheels every other year with some confusing new marketing initiative. Other brands are just slopping aerodynamic winglets, giant iPad-like TFT screens, and crazy LED lights on everything, just pandering to the latest gimmicks. Meanwhile, Royal Enfield is just chugging along in the background with the real winning strategy, building solid motorcycles, painting them cool colors, and making sure they just work well. Shocker, I know. But building quality, authentic bikes at affordable prices actually wins you market share.
So I want to leave you with this. In an age of hyperscaling, corporate grifters, and companies trying to squeeze every last imaginary cent out of consumers, is this honest, back-to-basics approach actually the ultimate competitive advantage? Royal Enfield's steady, methodical 25% year-over-year growth really proves that doing it sustainably over the long haul is way harder and way more rewarding than being just another flash-in-the-pan startup. I think it's a masterclass for any business in any industry and a huge breath of fresh air in today's market. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.